7:01 yet.
Holy
Damn,
shamoly.
was
We
that your
never did.
notification I heard ding on your phone?
You heard that?
I heard that.
Good grief. I got to turn the volume down. You should not be able to hear that.
I actually have mine muted, by the way, but I actually heard yours ding. And surprisingly, it wasn't somebody dinging about something we said on the show.
Well, so do you think that we will have anyone watch the show tonight? After the last show, we bashed the Cypress District so bad with, and the police jurors and, some of the shenanigans that they have going on. I mean, I don't know. I'm
Well,
wondering.
there's no and I had the Facebook page post several other posts, since last week's show, posting some information and documents, and we got some commentary on that. So I'm surprised that when we start the show live, we don't have like the proverbial black helicopters land in the yard and take us out of here in handcuffs for, free speech violations or something.
Well, I'm thinking that if we get censored tonight and we inexplicably get cut off, I got a pretty good idea. I know why. But
Yeah,
and I don't.
very.
Maybe I'll make a believer out of you tonight.
Maybe so. I mean, we're not that far removed on it, but our guest tonight is going to help clarify some of this, and I think maybe at least educate me on some of the issues with the censorship and big tech. So maybe I'll have to go ahead and get my tinfoil hat out of the closet.
I heard that. So, all right. I think we need to go ahead and go to our countdown. And those of you watching, you need to go on and share it out. Again, we have candidate Liz Murrill for the Attorney General. She is currently the Solicitor General, a wonderful person that's been fighting on your behalf. And a lot of you may not even know about her. I mean, us Yankees up here in Bossier, north of I-10, we don't hear a lot about them folks down there south of I-10, but we're going to tonight. So share it out and be a good opportunity for you to learn about this candidate.
You said it perfectly. Let's go to the countdown. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Folks, y'all know what to do. Like Duke said, share it out.
Just they feel helpless, they don't feel heard, they have nowhere to turn.
In all honesty, we try to lay low a little bit because of the fear that we would not be able to camp there.
And I titled it A Shot Across the Bow of the Good Old Boys.
Hello everybody. I don't think I've ever done a video before on here, but yeah, I wanted to tell y'all what frustrates me a little bit about permits.
Cockroach of the week is, drumroll please, Allie Feaster Smith.
We can't be apathetic about what's going on in our state. We have to all pull up our bootstraps and get on top of this. So you're right. There's a problem out there. I mean, and man, you can see it everywhere.
Well, look, we have allowed government to become our wherewithal to everything.
Well, I've not heard my name in stable or Baton Rouge in stable in the same sentence in a long time.
You're about to be killed by a Zamboni, or you're gonna die in 5 minutes.
This Bossier Watch live broadcast is brought to you by David B. Womack for all your contracting and construction needs. The Outdoor News, fishing and outdoors for our area. Acadiana Mortgage, over 23 years in the mortgage business. Pelican Training and Consulting is an IWTP customized training provider with over 25 years of success to show for it. Call them for a free consultation today. Pelican Training and Consulting matches employers with 50-plus employees with training dollars. Smarter Geek, making technology easier. And the many supporters, donations, and folks sharing information and watching out for Bossier. Now, grab your popcorn and a drink. Here we go. And we have made it through our, I guess that will be 155th intro. Although we didn't start doing the intro till later on in the shows.
Well, it looks like everyone is still hungover, or they are still in a stupor from Memorial Day because there's not a lot of folks watching tonight. What's up? Did you make everybody mad?
It wouldn't be the first time, I guess, and ran everybody off, but we'll see. Maybe it'll pick up here in a few minutes. We did go through our little intro and banner back and forth at the beginning pretty quick, so maybe it's just that they hadn't all got their notifications yet and tuned in.
Yeah, so maybe we should have put some kind of notice that we were going to tell a bunch of lies and innuendo, and maybe that would have gotten everyone riled up. But
well, if we would have just mentioned either First Bossier or that bureaucracy to the north of us that I can't say the name of, if we would have mentioned them tonight, or a particular person that Greg Bell pointed out in the comments, maybe if we'd have mentioned them, we'd have got some a boost in the viewership. But anyway, people will watch you either way. We do the podcast after this too, so we're on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter Live, and we release the podcast version. Generally, I do it, within 15 or 20 minutes after the show, so, people will get the content either way. Some people like to be sneaky and, not watch it till after the fact.
yeah, so I was interested to know. I mean, and I got to give you compliments, Rex. I mean, I hate to say it this way, but hat tip to you because, I reached out to you across the weekend and you politely informed me that you were doing the high school, fishing league thing. I mean, so your Memorial Day weekend, you were volunteering.
Yeah,
Hat
I
tip
was.
to you, brother. Good job.
Well, and you've heard me talk about it multiple times. Obviously, everybody, no secret, everybody knows I love to bass fish. But specifically, we had the championship weekend for the high school league up here, which is, I think we've got about 18 or 20 schools total, 115, 120 teams total from various schools and all that. Make a long story short, we had a makeup tournament because we had canceled the Red River a few weeks ago because of the high water. We had that on Caddo Saturday, and then the championship on Sunday, the top 50 teams, and they pretty much all showed up even though it was Memorial Weekend. So, credit to all the anglers and boat captains and dads and moms and grandpas and relatives and all that they got these high school kids out there fishing and not in trouble. That's always a good thing.
Well, I don't know if I would go so far to say as that they didn't do any trouble because fate would have it, my teenage twins, we had a little get together over here at the house and took them out in the boat and all that. But there was a couple of them that said they were some of those bass fishermen that you're talking about. And I asked them, I said, well, hey, do you know this little scrawny guy, a little tech guy named Rex? He said, oh, yeah. He's a great guy, blah, blah, blah. Well, later on that night, my yard got rolled.
Imagine that.
So I'm just wondering if that camera out there that I have, which kids is it going to show? Is it going to be some high school fishing kids that maybe were coached a little across the weekend? I don't know.
Surely I wouldn't have anything to do with rolling your yard. Surely not.
Well, if I did publicly announce who the perpetrators was, I'm sure that I would be censored by Facebook, and probably it was because it was at your hand or something of that nature. But I got a pretty good idea that our guest waiting in the wings is probably going to be able to enlighten us on the subject of censorship. What do you think?
Well, I think so. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to, by the magic of the software, hope I hit the right button. Let's see if we can bring Liz Murrill in. I think I pronounced that right. Liz, can you hear us?
I can.
We can hear you. It's always a miracle with technology and us, whether everything works right.
Technology is a miracle. It's great stuff unless it's being used to censor your speech.
It could go either way, the good or the bad. So why don't we start off with maybe introduce yourself and, you're running for Attorney General, but also you mentioned when we were talking before the show that you're Solicitor General. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that and who you are and what you do now and of course, running for the AG's office.
Well, I am currently the Solicitor General, and I've had a couple of roles in our office. I've also been the Civil Division Director and the Administrative Director, but I've been the Solicitor General since Jeff was elected in 2016. And what that really has given me is the privilege of being able to defend our laws against the constitutional attacks and to defend us against the federal overreach of the federal government. And I've also been able to assist the DAs in over a couple of hundred cases to make sure that convictions stick and all the way up through the federal court system. So it's just a great opportunity. But I have over 30 years experience in a lot of different capacities and really in every branch of government in the state and federal government. So it's just a great job that I have now where I can defend our people in our state from an attack on their civil liberties and on their constitutional rights.
Well, so I'll fire off the first question, I guess. So you mentioned defending the state against attacks, which sounds good, but maybe explain for those of us out there that aren't familiar with how that process works. It seems like a lot of times we just see in the news or whatever that the Attorney General has filed this lawsuit and the Attorney General has filed that lawsuit against, the federal government or whoever it may be. So how does that work, where y'all are filing lawsuits to defend our liberties? Maybe kind of clarify how that process works.
Well, if you think about this, every state has its own level of sovereignty, right? Where all 50 states have a certain level of independence from everybody else and from the federal government. And so we are able to exercise our power of self-governance through our legislatures and through our local elected officials. And then the federal government kind of exists above all of that, and it can exercise power, but it only has limited areas where it can exercise that power. Now, under current, these days, that's a very, very broad power, and the federal government has a lot of power over us. And we all felt that very acutely during COVID when the federal government started telling us we had to be vaccinated or we were going to lose our jobs. And they started putting pressure on millions and millions and millions of Americans and threatening their livelihoods if they didn't do what the federal government wanted them to do. So part of my job is to push back against things like that and to protect us from actions by the federal government that hurt us or hurt our people directly and that limit our ability to govern ourselves through our local and state elected officials.
All right, Duke, you want to fire off, or I've got plenty more questions.
Well, so you said when Jeff became AG, you were made the Solicitor General. I'm wondering, are you the first Solicitor General? Did you say that?
I am. We've never had a Solicitor General until Jeff came in and appointed me. He appointed me about 2 months in after he was elected. We, at that time, which was 2016, there were about 27 states who had Solicitor Generals. Now almost every state has one. So we were moving in the same direction as a lot of other states at that time to create this office where the person who is the head of it is dedicated to watching out for our state's interest from the attack of the federal government. So, I also manage all of our litigation that's going up to the United States Supreme Court, so that we have consistency in our representation at the United States Supreme Court, because whenever there's a case there, we are actually, exposing the whole country to the law that is made through the decisions of the United States Supreme Court. So it's important that we are careful about how we do that as well. So I think it just provides a lot of not control, but oversight and leadership in terms of representing our state at the national level. And then part of what I do is bring lawsuits against the federal government. So protecting us from federal overreach means checking the federal government. It means when they do something that we think is wrong, we have to file a lawsuit to stop them.
So let's take that and segue into, I'll go put on my tinfoil hat, but into the censorship deal. So y'all recently, or the state was, involved in a lawsuit against the federal government over tech censorship. And Duke and I have battled back and forth over what I define as censorship and all that sort of thing. But explain to us this most recent court case and what transpired with all that.
So the case is about the federal government conspiring or threatening and coercing big tech platforms to use their power to censor people's speech. And so they effectively become an agent of the federal government when they do that. So they're not doing it because they independently want to establish standards and things like that they're going to enforce against people. Because remember, tech platforms have immunity for letting people speak. Tech platforms actually make money and gain followers and participants by having open platforms where people can engage with one another and hash things out without being censored. And so it's not in their best interest to censor people's speech. At the same time, there are some nefarious things that occur through the internet and through tech platforms. So having some standards and enforcing them, say against Russia, actually setting up bots on their systems and using those to directly interfere with our elections, is a problem. On the other hand, if you see something on Facebook and you like it and you share it, you've now made that your speech. Now that's your speech. And if the federal government wants to take it down because they don't like your speech and they force the tech companies to do that, that's censorship. And that's what violates the First Amendment. It violates the First Amendment when the United States government uses its own powers to censor speech that it doesn't like by domestic speakers, by people, United States citizens.
All right, so when you say force them to do it, so in my mind, we've got the military or the FBI raiding an office or whatever to force, these big tech companies to do that. But that in and of itself would probably be a story. How does the federal government go about coercing or forcing people to do it? Does this, come from the president's office down, or can you describe for us kind of how that works?
So it doesn't have to be as overt as, we're going to put a gun to your head and make you do this. Urging, coercing, enticing, offering them something valuable to them. So whether it's a carrot or it's a stick, the federal government can't do that with the tech companies with the purpose of enticing them or urging them or coercing them to do what the government couldn't do on its own. So that's one piece of this. The other part of it is, where did it come from? Well, our documents show that it came straight from the White House. So there were personnel inside the White House, and those people bragged on emails saying this goes all the way to the top. I mean, all the way to the top. So, they were bragging, and they were using threats to these companies to essentially, I think part of the threat that we saw was they were threatening to revoke their Section 230 immunity. And so they actually put them in a position of forcing them to censor people's speech and edit their speech to protect their immunity from being editors, if that makes any sense.
Oh, it makes it makes perfect sense. And to kind of head off into that direction, Dee Dee White Clark asked a great question, which was where I was going to go. And she says, does the Bossier Parish Police Jury and other taxpayer funded entities have a right to limit comments or turn off comments on their social media pages? I think what you guys learned in the course of your lawsuit, that you had a lot of, I would, I hate to say, lower level government entities who I guess were hip with the program that were making requests for censorship. Is that accurate or inaccurate?
So her question is different, but yes, I mean, we did see that there was something called switchboarding, and switchboarding was a whole system that allowed other local government entities or secretaries of state, some of those were doing it. So when we saw this with election censorship, where they were claiming that there was disinformation about the election, and so they had this whole system set up where you could submit information to the switchboard, and the switchboard would basically give it over to the tech companies, and they would take down that speech. So, and we were able to identify certain things that we highlighted those things because they are very well known to the public, like the Hunter Biden laptop story, or Hillary Clinton running for president, or there was a picture of Jill Biden that was being criticized online, and they took all of those things down. We also found that there were some states that were engaging in the switchboarding around the election. But it was like a superhighway where they could submit information, and that information would be sent to the tech companies, and the tech companies would take it down. So it was extraordinary in its scope, and it's extraordinary that the federal government admits that it was violating people's First Amendment rights, and that somehow they just claim that that's basically a collateral damage to their other justifications for trying to protect us from disinformation.
All right, so Dee Dee White Clark also said elected officials aren't allowed per SCOTUS to block people. Now, I want to clarify something, Dee Dee, because I've mentioned or alluded to that on the show before. And Liz, feel free to interject when I get done or correct me if I'm wrong. But that case was originally against, and I'm going to raise the hair on the necks of some of my fellow Republicans, but that case was originally against the Trump administration for blocking people on Twitter. And it did eventually reach SCOTUS after some lower court decisions actually sided with the ability of the government to block people. And then it went to SCOTUS, but by then Trump was out of office, and so basically it was kind of a moot point. So, Liz, in your opinion, if, and I'm just using our local police jury, they've turned off commenting for pretty much everybody now. What is your opinion, or do you have any comment on the ability of local government entities to block people or turn off commenting, period? I mean, do they even have to, government bodies even have to post on social media?
So they don't. I mean, I think that if they do, then they have to be careful about how they are cutting people off from commenting. Like if you have a site and you permit commenting, then I think they are going to potentially run into some litigation if they are deciding who can speak and who can't, as long as it's protected speech. So, there is some speech that I think that we know from Supreme Court cases is not protected speech. So, and I'll give you, there is an example of this litigation that's ongoing. Someone sued the Tulane First Amendment Clinic, is representing someone who said some pretty vile things to Katrina Jackson on her Twitter feed, I believe. And then they filed a First Amendment lawsuit when she blocked them. And, I saw what that person said. I don't think that's protected speech. It was racist. It was sexist. It did not fall into the zone of protect, and it was personal. So it wasn't about something public. It was the kind of speech that really does fall into into category of non-protected speech. But And so can a person who has an individual account and they use that account as a state rep, for example, to communicate with their constituency, are they required to expose themselves to that kind of hate speech? I don't think so. A public body like the city council is very different. If they have a public site and they permit commenting, then I think they have to let a lot of people comment on what they think about government and criticize it and say things that they may not like to hear. But if they don't allow commenting, I don't think they have to allow commenting. So, there's nothing in the law that says they have to let people speak at that site. They do have to permit public comment at open meetings.
Right. And I think that's something that I would remind our viewers that they forget sometimes is, we're big on open meetings and the open meetings law and all that. But the government bodies are not required to stream those meetings. They do it as more of a convenience. There's nothing in the law that says they have to do that. They only have to take minutes of the meetings, and those minutes don't have to be 100% accurate of everything that was said. They just have to be a good general guideline. And full disclosure, I'm not an attorney. I just play one on Facebook sometimes, but so correct me if I'm wrong at any point. But anyway, I would just remind Dee Dee and some of our viewers that sometimes we forget, because social media is so ingrained in us, that we think, well, they just all are supposed to do this. And the recourse is you have to sue them.
Well, that's right. I mean, our office, the Attorney General's office, actually enforces the open meetings law. But when, say, if the city of Baton Rouge has a site up that provides posts of information of public things that are happening, they don't have to let people comment on that. That's not an open meeting. If they stream the city council meeting, they don't have to they're not required, and they do not have to allow commenting on the streaming site. They do have to provide it at an open meeting, and if they violate that, then that you can file a complaint with our office, but it has to be filed within 60 days of the potential violation. And then we would look at it, investigate it, and determine whether or not there's been a violation. Usually it doesn't really get you very far unless they voted on something, because if they did vote on something, then it would nullify the vote.
So I don't know if we, and not to cut you off, Duke, did you explain how that case on the censorship, how that concluded, or is it completely done through the court system? Let's maybe finish up with that. I think I kind of diverted us off to another deal on another tangent.
Our case or the Trump case? So our case is
your
just
case.
not done yet. Yeah, our case is, we had an oral argument last Friday in front of Judge Doty in Monroe, and he asked a lot of really, really good questions. We were before him on a motion for a preliminary injunction, which means we would like him to block the government from continuing to engage in enticing or coercing tech platforms to censor people's speech. And if he issues that injunction, and I am highly confident that I believe he will, then the tech platforms are on their own. If they're going to censor people's speech, they're not going to be able to blame the government. They shouldn't be doing that to begin with. But if they are going to do it, then it would be a private company acting as a private matter. And they know that if they are editing, they are going to expose themselves to losing their Section 230 immunity.
Very interesting.
So Liz, the original lawsuit really, that ball got rolling over COVID, correct?
It did. It started with COVID because we had some examples of speech that we knew had been taken down due to basically not spreading the government's message about COVID the way the government wanted it spread. It opened up once the judge allowed us to do some early discovery, which meant we could ask the government for documents that it had, and we could ask the tech companies for the people they were communicating with. That's when it got a lot bigger, and we saw that it had really spread well beyond COVID, and it had involved the election, prior to the election, and it involved, just general speech about the Biden family.
Now, yeah, you guys discovered as a result of y'all's work, and I mean, I can't compliment, you and every. I mean, look, you've done a wonderful job, but all of you guys, I mean, you have to have somebody standing behind you, and then they have to have somebody standing behind them. To everyone of y'all that have been in the trenches fighting on this, hat tip to all of you, and I mean, I couldn't imagine all of the work. I know it has been a lot of work, and you don't get credit enough. So, and I can't say thank you enough.
Well, and I'll say this, just the briefing on this motion was over 1,000 pages. The government's brief was about 1,000 pages. Our brief was over 360 pages. It is a lot of work. But I'll say this, guys, I mean, I've never seen a government enterprise so threatening to the Constitution as what I've seen in this case. And it really ought to give everyone pause that the government so easily was able to influence and gain the cooperation of these tech companies and just basically make them their partners in violating the United States Constitution on the First Amendment, which is just such a huge protector of us against tyranny. It's shocking in its scope, and it's appalling in its effort.
Well,
Rex, let me please.
yeah.
So, Liz, again, I was complimenting you a lot on the work that you guys have done, but for a lot of people, and I have to admit that I'm kind of one of those people. You guys are seeking to make folks aware of what the government has done. I followed the case. Make folks aware of what you've done, and you're trying to prevent the government from doing it again. If they're so emboldened to do what they've done already, why should we believe that they're going to stop, the next time, and they're not going to do it again? So for me, I've almost lost faith in the legal system. What would you say to somebody like me that says, you know what, we can kill all the trees in the world? I don't know that that's going to change them. I mean, what would you say to give me hope? And if all we're going to do is get them to agree to change, what about those folks that, had they been able to glean information from, say, uncensored material on the internet, like I mentioned before, Luke Letlow. Luke Letlow, 1 week before he went in the hospital, was on this show. And I don't know all of the details of Luke's case. I do think that Luke, but
Yeah.
Could an outcome have been different for him and not just Luke? I'm just using him as an example, but could an outcome are we talking about more sinister things here?
Look, I think the heartbreaking thing about that question is that we will never know. And Julia will never know. And I've told many people, my son was the first myocarditis case reported in this state. And I, agreed to have him vaccinated because he was going to be a camp counselor, and they had all this information out that it was safe and that it was going to be, everything was fine. And he immediately started having problems within 24 hours after the second dose of the Pfizer vaccine. And he ended up in the hospital for a week in ICU. And it was very tenuous. He could have had a heart attack when I was driving him home from Marshall, Texas, by myself in the middle of the night while he was having heart pains. And what I heard from the government is, there's nothing to worry about. This isn't serious. It's no big deal. Everyone recovers. Myocarditis is mild. None of that was true. And so all of that was designed to avoid vaccine hesitancy, regardless of the consequences for people. And if my son had died, I just can't tell you. I mean, it's just, I can't imagine what people are going through when they're having to evaluate whether having that information at their, so that they could make the choice. They could make the decision on their own. Having that information might have changed something for them. And I think that is a terrible, terrible thing for a lot of people to have to live with.
Well, and I would remind everybody that, thinking that the government would never do anything nefarious is not that far stretched. It was not that many years ago that, let's just say, the federal government was experimenting on a certain, race minority folks, American citizens, and we all know how that turned out. So it's not beyond the stretch of imagination, in my opinion, that they would absolutely do this. I can only imagine what you were going through, having just given him, or had him take the vaccine, and now you're having to go through this.
It wasn't that long ago that the government was also forced sterilizing women who they believed to be, hysterical. I mean, crazy. I mean, they would just, somebody who was a little too uppity was going to get a lobotomy or sterilized. These are programs that were implemented by, sanctioned by, and defended by the government. So, you asked, how can we stop it? I mean, I think part of the answer to how we protect our people is by making sure that first of all, we have to protect local government. We have to protect our ability to govern ourselves at a more local level, because that's where the accountability is. So whether it's state or it's local government, you are going to be able to hold those people accountable. When you're being governed by Washington, D.C., there is no accountability up there, and there's not really a meaningful remedy for us to stop them easily. So, I think that that's part of what we've seen happening across this, through this administration, is attempts to centralize that power in Washington, D.C., and that diminishes the power of the states to fight them. So we always need to have elected officials who understand the importance of that fight and who are willing to step out and have that fight and to defend our civil liberties. You don't just get elected so that you can have a title. You don't just get elected so that you can have power. You get elected to protect the people and to protect and to defend and enforce the Constitution of our state and of our country. And so that's what we're doing. We are defending the Constitution that they abandoned.
Well, and I would remind many of my Republican friends too, and I mean, I vote lock, stock, and barrel Republican, but I don't always agree with the Republican Party. But I would remind everybody that the famous room that the NSA had in AT&T's, basically their corporate offices when the NSA was spying on Americans, that all happened around the Bush administration, and the Patriot Act, famously, was enacted during the post 9/11 Bush era. So it's not always just a Democratic thing. I think it's a power and, it's just a power thing sometimes.
If you think about, and I do this, I mean, because of the nature of my work, I think about this a lot. The founders of our country fought a war for independence. They laid their lives on the line and they fought a war for independence. And then they sat down and they very carefully and thoughtfully hammered out an agreement, a document, a constitution, and a Declaration of Independence, and then a document, a constitution that recognizes that power, that the power that human beings will seek if they have power, right? I mean, it acknowledges and recognizes the power that is inherently going to be sought by human beings if they have it. And so it seeks to balance that power with power through other branches. That's what's so amazing about this document, is that power balances power balances power. And so by having these three separate branches of government with that are co-equals in terms of the power they wield, one can balance out the other by preventing the other from overstepping. What we saw during COVID was an abdication of that responsibility by a lot of the branches that are supposed to set things right. And I certainly hope we never see that again.
Well, and I just throw in there one more thing too, is that unfortunately, a lot of us, and I'm including myself in it, and I'm sure y'all would have to include yourselves in it, we kind of allowed it to happen. I mean, I would have never thought, if you had backed up 6 months from the COVID panic era, and said to me, "Oh, we're going to essentially shut down a large portion of our economy, nearly bankrupt, or in many cases bankrupt businesses, shut down all of this stuff, shut down everything we do socially," I would have said, "You're crazy. There's no way this will happen because we have the internet to get it out there and get the word out." And sure enough, what happened? We all blinked and presto.
Well, fear is a very, very powerful force. And people were sick and people died. And I think that fear, and I don't think that the federal government, wasted that opportunity. We saw restrictions in some places against churches and worship that should have really caused people to raise their eyebrows and recognize that was this was really moving well beyond simply like public health measures that were necessary and appropriate. And while we figured out what was happening and how lethal or how dangerous this is and how we were going to treat it. So all of that was happening in real time. And I think that, there were a lot of people who were scared. Leadership should have been both cautious, but also respectful of the Constitution. And that's where I saw an enormous failure. We saw churches treated differently than the mall or Lowe's or Home Depot. In Kentucky, the governor, he basically threatened a bunch of people because they were going to church inside their vehicles at a drive-up movie theater. I mean, that's moronic.
Wow.
I mean, that's just ridiculous. I think it's indefensible. And yet he went to court to defend it and say, yep, they're going to be in real danger if they're inside their vehicles with the people they live inside their houses with, going to church and listening to it on a radio at a movie theater outside.
Wow. Yeah, I appreciate the fact that you use the term moron or moronic. I mean, look, I appreciate that. It says to me that you're down to earth and you're a regular person. But I'm wondering, I got another question for you, and I'm not going to push you a whole lot more. I appreciate everything you've said on the censorship thing, but as the Attorney General, I mean, we've got a lot of problems in Louisiana with crime. I'm just wondering, what's your ideas on that? I mean, obviously, you've got to have thought about that. If you want to be the AG, you've had to think about that a little bit. I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
Well, and I've put some things in motion that I'd like to see through. Starting with my own department, I've helped the DAs personally in over 250 cases in the Fifth Circuit and at the United States Supreme Court. Over 200 of those were cases that were filed against the DAs in the United States Supreme Court, and my team offers to help them. We will do all of the work for them so that we make sure that they are getting the best representation in that case possible in the United States Supreme Court. And we do the same thing in the United States Fifth Circuit. We do that because we need to support the DAs and we need to be able to make sure these convictions stick. It's just not over when they get the conviction. There's a lot of appeals that follow for years and years, for decades sometimes. And, if you'll give me, I will tell you that one story involving a gentleman who is in prison still, but he was seeking an appeal 30 years later. He had been convicted of murdering a 6-year-old after molesting him down in Calcasieu Parish. And the Calcasieu DA lost that case in the United States Fifth Circuit in federal habeas review. So this is 30 years down the line. This man's third trial, and he's now on his federal appeals on his third trial, and he wins again, and they grant him a new trial. We got that flipped, and it was important because this man was, even his own lawyers had said that he was a dangerous pedophile, that he would do this again, and that he should never be able to be outside of a restrained facility. We managed to, the problem was that he had spent enough time in prison that had that ruling stood, he would have had to be released. And we were able to come in, assist the DA, get the Fifth Circuit to take the case with the whole court, which was 16 judges, and get them to reverse the panel that had voted to release this man. So, the kind of support that we can bring to the DAs is truly important, and we've already put that in motion. I personally put that in motion, and started doing that at least 6 years ago. So we have a long line of cases where we've assisted the DAs. We also prosecute cases. We do that as on recusals from the DAs, and that comes to us from DAs all across the state. We provide that service, and we do it pursuant to the Louisiana Constitution. We're not original jurisdiction prosecutors, which means we can't just step in and take over cases and start prosecuting them. The DAs have the original first shot.
Yeah, so you are can you educate us a little bit on the relationship between the AG's office and the Attorney General and the DAs? Is it like the Attorney General is the boss of the DAs, or kind of explain to everybody how that hierarchy works?
So no, like the Attorney General is not the boss of the DAs. I think the Attorney General is influential, and the Attorney General does work in partnership with the DAs. We do take the recusals from the DAs, and so that's a very important role that we serve, that is necessary. But we generally work in partnering and supporting the DAs, and I don't think that we ever really need to be in conflict directly with the DAs. We have the same mission, and our mission and their mission should be to enforce the laws of this state, the criminal laws of this state, and to make sure that victims of crime are getting the justice that is provided to them, under the law, so that we can make sure that people are confident that the state is in fact pursuing justice for victims of crime.
All right, good explanation. Duke.
Well, it sounds wonderful to me. Is what changes in the AG's office should you become the AG? And I think you're well on your way. I love everything that I have heard so far. What changes in the AG's office would you see making, or would you not make any?
No, well, I have some things that I'd like to do, and I think that it will help to have a conservative governor who is supportive of the role that we play across the state. And I think that I would go and ask for a number of things. I would like to expand our investigators unit. That group does have statewide jurisdiction to investigate crime anywhere in the state, and I think I'd like to see that group expanded. And I'd particularly like to see the group expanded in a way to provide more services across the state on cybercrime. We already have a very specialized unit that specializes in going after people who are selling or watching or buying child pornography on the internet. And so that unit is a very specialized unit, and they have very high-tech skills. But I'd like to see a unit just like that built up for financial crimes, and because those target the elderly, and they target a lot of people now through the internet. And I think we need a specialized task force and unit set up to address that. I would like to also set up a task force to deal with gangs. We used to have a gang crime task force unit, and I'd like to see that set up in our office. In addition to continuing to doing what we're already doing, which is supporting the DAs through assisting them in defending their convictions after they obtain them at the trial court level and taking their recusals.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the financial crimes over the internet and specifically preying on the elderly. I was just watching a YouTube video. There's a YouTuber out there that is what they specialize in, is reversing that trend. They target the scammers. Like, they
Yeah.
literally go to India and infiltrate these scammers. Their offices, that's all they do. And they infiltrate them and pull all these pranks on them. And then, of course, they video it, and his YouTube videos are insanely high, especially compared to bossierwatch, where we talk about politics. But anyway, it's funny that you mentioned that, because that's one of the ways that they're fighting back in India, or fighting back against the people that happen to be from there, which I guess
I
are
just get
outside the reach of
calls
the
all
purview.
the time. I get calls all the time with somebody who's been a victim of that kind of scam. And it's heartbreaking. I mean, there was a woman that I ran into one day. I was going to the grocery store and I stopped into Quantum Express near my neighborhood grocery store. And I happened to walk in and encounter her dealing with the man behind the counter. And she was trying to stop a package after she realized she had become the victim of a scammer. This scammer was a person who was impersonating an FTC agent, and had kind of scared her into going and getting a $250,000 cashier's check, and then putting it in an UPS envelope and sending it to somebody in Wisconsin. And after she sent it, I think she just realized she had been scammed, and she was trying to stop the package. And she happened to run into me at the exact right moment, because I was able to call our investigators and they were able to stop the package after she had basically been spurned by the FBI and UPS.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because in my tech business, I encounter a lot of this, and I've even had people who are clients of mine, and they fall for the scams before they call me. I'll even say this: I've had more than one attorney who has fallen for the scam and actually given out his credit card number and hers credit card numbers before. So this is across the spectrum. Let me ask you this: so if somebody is the victim of a scam like that, what should they do? Should they reach out to the AG's office or their DA or the local police? What do you recommend as the course of action?
And we do have a public protection division. It's not the criminal division, it's the public protection division that deals with, handles complaints and reports of this kind of thing. Even if it's happened to you, and we can't reverse that, it's important to report it to our office so that we can help protect other people and we can know what the scam is. These folks are very, very smart, and it's pervasive and it's relentless. And I think that's how they end up sometimes capturing people who are smart and are savvy. I mean, even smart tech savvy people will fall for this. And part of the problem is that it is so relentless. I mean, I probably get 25 phishing emails in my email every single day. And so I think that we just have to educate people continually and make sure that they know about the different scams that are out there, and that we continue to kind of teach people how to be smart on their computers and with their cell phones. And that, if you have any amount of suspicion at all, don't give you just should make it a rule to never give anybody your personal information over the phone or over the internet. If the bank calls you, you should go to the bank and talk to the bank in person. I mean, they don't typically do that kind of thing over the internet. I don't know of any organization that is going to call you and ask you for your social security number or your driver's license number or your passwords or things like that. I mean, I can tell you that's almost 100% of the time a scam.
Yeah, like I tell everybody, Microsoft is never going to call you. Apple is never going to call. They didn't even call their corporate customers. So that's
Right.
great advice, Duke. I could keep going all night at the
I,
rate we're
I know
going.
you could. Well, Liz, look, I want to just personally say thank you for the work that you have done. With the AG's office, you guys. I mean, I know I followed what y'all have been doing. Great work. I mean, why someone hasn't been doing what y'all are doing before, I don't know. But thank you for seizing the opportunity and working hard. I mean, you guys are working, and I appreciate that. I respect that. And for those folks that, haven't followed us close, I mean, give them your pitch of why they should vote for you for Attorney General or to be the next Attorney General of Louisiana.
I am dedicated to the people of Louisiana and to defending our liberties and our laws and our Constitution and our people. And I consider it a great privilege to be able to do this job. And I want to keep doing it so that I can kind of expand my ability to protect our people and after spending 30 years as a lawyer and working in every branch of government at the state and federal level, I feel like I have the problem solving skills, the experience, and the passionate belief in our people and our state to exercise the kind of leadership that I think we need in this position. I am wholly and completely dedicated to the people of our state.
Well, based on our conversation this evening, I can say you are definitely a very interesting person and dedicated, sounds like to me, to looking out for the regular folks. So I appreciate that. And we'll definitely keep you in mind when we get to the ballot box.
Hey, Rex,
I
and
appreciate it.
she hunts and fishes too.
I
Well,
do.
I think I did see a picture of you with some mossy oak. I started to use that one on our little published, deal. So you actually hunt and fish, huh?
I do. I hunt and I fish, and I've been known to kill large alligators. My favorite thing to do is fish. I like to saltwater and freshwater fish. So I do enjoy catching bass, but I have a little fishing kayak, and I really love saltwater very much.
Well, see, there you go, Duke. You're trying to get me off on a hunting and fishing tangent. We'll be here next thing we know. It'll be like dawn outside.
That's why I
6
threw
o'clock
it
in the
in at
morning.
the end. That's why I threw it in at
Right.
the end.
Well, Liz, I'd like to say thank you a lot for coming on and spending the evening with us for just a little while. And I've got a ton more questions. Maybe we can have you on again, and we'll go down a couple other rabbit holes.
Well, I'd be happy to come on anytime, and thanks y'all for having me.
All right.
Yes,
Thank you.
ma'am. Thank you. Good night.
All right.
Good
Good night.
night.
Well, Mr.
Well,
Lowry, that was definitely very interesting.
yeah. So, I mean, right there, I hate to say, from the proverbial horse's mouth, but that's someone right there at the heart of one of the most, consequential cases, in our adult lifetime, with that case. She was right there litigating it within the past
Well,
week.
and I'll say this too, because honestly, I didn't know her from Adam until tonight. I've heard her name mentioned a couple of times, in political circles, but that was about it. And I got to say, Duke, I'm pretty impressed. I mean, we don't officially endorse any candidates per se. I mean, we can. It's our show. We can do what we want. But I have to say, I would have to seriously consider her when I go to the ballot box. She just seems genuine, very genuine.
Well, I got to tell you, tonight, was the first night that I've actually spoken to her, and I'm pretty confident she's got my vote. I would find it hard to believe that there's anything that the other candidates could say to me or convince me to vote otherwise. And I think a lot of that comes from what I've already seen. I didn't have to talk to her to know, because I kept saying about the work, you know, the things that they glean. I mean, they've been fighting the government, for goodness sake. I
Right.
mean, fighting the government, and they haven't been fighting just the government. They've been fighting more than that. You've got all these other organizations that are standing right there in the wings, the Atlantic Council. You've got all, the Soros people. You got all that different bunch. They've all, remember Jill Hines on our show, a couple of shows
Yeah.
before, talking about that suit? I mean, that you're talking about an army that they've been taking on, and they've been handing them their hat. I
Right.
mean,
Well,
you
and
you
look,
got to.
I'll be the first to admit, sometimes I, look at the news deals and I'm thinking, why is Jeff's office filing another lawsuit, and they're filing this lawsuit and that lawsuit, and how does that really pertain to Louisiana? But she kind of, addressed a little bit of that tonight and kind of educated me on some of the bigger picture reasons why they do it. That generally their office, the AG's office, is looking out for the people of Louisiana first, and in many cases that'll have repercussions to people from other states, or why they sign on, or or whatever they call it in legal terms, to this lawsuit, or they're file a friend of the court brief and all that kind of legal jargon that they do. And after talking to her for a little bit here on the show, the light bulb kind of went off, so to speak, to me that, wait a minute, there's a bigger picture here.
Yeah, there is a bigger picture. And I'll say, the only one regret that I might have is that if she does become the AG, gosh, I hope there's somebody that can fill her shoes as the Solicitor General coming up behind her, because, I mean, her role is pretty significant and she's done a hell of a job at it. I mean, I hope there's somebody waiting in the wings that can carry the load.
Oh, I agree. And I want to pitch this out there. So I was thinking about this just now to everybody that's watching, because we got up to, what have we got? About 36. We hit nearly 40 people watching, and Twitter doesn't give us a count back of who's watching on Twitter anyway. But I would, I would ask some of our viewers and watchers to do this. If you got some questions, maybe we can have Liz on in the future. If you got some questions to ask her, and they don't have to be softballs. If you got some questions to ask her about, what she would do as AG or her current role as Solicitor General, feel free to ask them in the comments and let us know. Or, if you feel that another candidate maybe is more qualified, let us know in the comments too.
So I'm just wondering, Rex. I mean, last week, we had a 80 to 100 live viewer show, and we dropped to a 40 viewer show when we have her come on. I mean, that's a 50% drop. So you're telling me Robert Berry has more appeal and Philip Rogers has more appeal than a candidate for the Attorney General of Louisiana?
Well, the old saying, people would rather see the train wreck than the flower garden. Now, not that the stuff that Liz was talking about tonight was any kind of flower garden type stuff. I mean, she's talking about, and adding credence to your censorship deal and all that, viewpoint and all that. So, not, she's talking about real stuff, but I'm just saying, sometimes people want to see the controversy when it stirs up.
So Jill Hines is throwing out a name out there for, a possible pick for Solicitor General, John Sauer. I'm not familiar with John, Jill. Perhaps you can educate us on that individual, and but anyway, that doesn't matter. That's not even a race, I don't think.
Right. All right. Yeah, I think that's probably the AG says you're going to be Solicitor General, and that's the way it goes probably. We forgot to ask her that. We need to find out next time. Ask her how the Solicitor General gets appointed, how that process works. Give us the inside baseball. All right, Mr. Lowry.
That's all I have.
This is going to be one of our shortest shows on record. She said a lot in under an hour.
She did. And I mean, there's not a lot of folk. I'm sure we'll hit a couple of thousand in the views after the fact. But, hey, it was a good show. It was a great interview. I'm glad that she came on. I'm glad I got to meet her, ask her some questions, get some detail, get a feel. I've read a lot. I know a lot about her, and she meets the expectations that I had. I mean, she was there. I don't see how anybody else can carry her water. I don't see it.
It's going to be a tough road for sure. All right. So also, any of y'all out there, if you have a candidate for a particular office that you'd like to have us interview, reach out to the candidate and say, hey, you guys you should go on Bossier Watch, and then let us know, and we'll reach out to them and see if they want to come on. Because, Democrat or Republican, it really doesn't matter. We're interested in interviewing anybody. We've done a lot of it and had a lot of interesting conversations, including tonight's conversation.
Hey, I did. It's funny you said that, because I did have somebody say, they said, Rex, y'all need to do a debate. And they said we needed to do a debate between Dodie Horton and Chris Turner.
Ooh, that could be very interesting. Because, look, it's no secret that I'm, a pretty good fan of Dodie. She and I have butted heads a little bit politically before. I won't mention her deal with our good sheriff several years back that kind of got her in political hot water, with a lot of Republicans. But aside from that, it's no secret that I'm a pretty good fan of Dodie's. But I haven't heard that much about Chris Turner. I've talked to him on the phone, full disclosure, and I think you're either friends with him or kind of know him, from the Haughton era and all that. But it would be a very interesting conversation to have the two on and have them kind of go back and forth on some topics that, because I'd really like to know what separates the two.
Well, I mean, I am very good friends with both of those individuals, and I think they're both great people. I really do. I love both of them to death,
Yeah.
and I think from me being a Halton person, I can tell you that I think a lot of people in Halton, this race is going to be a race that kind of tears at the heartstrings of Halton folks, and I think a substantive debate between those two, would probably be productive. And I'm not talking about that personal crap because I don't think either
Right.
one of these two people would take any personal shots at each other. I don't think that's the
Right.
case at all. But the folks in Halton are going to have a tough decision here between these two people because you're having to balance, friendships and policy. And I don't know, a lot of times in these races, you can't get down to the policy issues. You can't fine tune down as good as what you need to fine tune down. And, kind of what was said to me was, look, y'all ought to have one of those debates and, you know, put the questions to those folks, in which, the way we do the debates, we let the candidates, it's not us, we just basically host it. That's
Right.
it. But let them put their questions for each other and, let's see where they stand on the issues. And
Yeah, I agree. And if they're tough political questions, so be it. That's what we want to see. You know, the purpose of starting this show in the beginning with us was to kind of give the inside baseball. We don't want the standard stump speeches. We don't want the standard talking points. We want some stuff that's substantive. Didn't say that right. But is also interesting to all the viewers and stuff that you don't normally hear if you just go to a, regular political fundraiser where they're going to rattle off the talking points. That's no fun.
no, that's no fun. And, we don't have to stop just there. I mean, I think, I, I know Seabiscuit. I don't know the coach that's running against him. I, I can't vote in that race. I'd be interested to know kind of where those guys stand politically. And on policy. I think I know where Seaball stands, but I don't know where the coach stands, and I think that would be beneficial as well.
Yeah, our reach is not just Bossier City, that's it. Our reach is Bossier Parish and all the surrounding areas. So, yeah, that would be interesting too.
But the most contentious race, my opinion is, that House District 9 race. I
Yeah.
think that's I don't see the other races. I don't see them as being contentious, and I don't see I see that as the one. I mean,
Yeah,
is that the way
I
you
agree.
see it?
I agree 100%. All right. Well, we'll try to put that in motion. And, of course, the truth is, as we kind of close out the show, folks, that there's not a lot this time of the year that happens politically. And, I'm fishing a lot. And, Duke, I know you've got your crawfish business kind of going. You've, had a few posts showing your crawfish and all that and all your other stuff that y'all do. And you and Kara have 25 years? Am I correct about that in the mortgage business?
That is correct. We have our 25-year anniversary. Well, it was just here the other day. Yeah, been doing home mortgages in Bossier and Northwest Louisiana for over 25 years. I think we might be the oldest independent lender, in North Louisiana, maybe north of I-10.
Yeah. So
So
even if people aren't, mortgaging or need to borrow against their house or whatever the deal is, even if they need advice or whatever, they can probably reach out to you and Kara. Well, I would say probably actually need to reach out to Kara more so than you, but anyway,
yeah,
at least get some advice.
Yeah, talk to Kara because if you talk to me, I'm gonna have you buying a deer stand or something. You don't
There
want.
you go. Buying a couple of sacks of crawfish. So.
Yeah.
All right. With all that said, so anyway, the shows may be a little bit shorter this time of the year. That generally happens, and I may be fishing some, and Duke may be working. But anyway, we'll try to keep everybody informed and have as many quality shows as we can during the summer months. And we appreciate everybody that watches.
All right. Y'all have a good night. See you next week.
All right. See y'all later, folks. We are out of here.